Hey everyone, it's Michelle. In today's video, I have another sunscreen review for you all. This is good so far. I have 2 videos within the week. I think the universe is just working well for me today in particular because my room is fairly clean. I washed my hair. Skin is so-so, but not bad enough that I'm afraid to go on camera and share with you all what my skin looks like. But most importantly, today was the straw that broke the camel's back with this sunscreen. I purchased it a few weeks ago, have been pretty much using it non-stop, maybe a couple of days here or there. I took a break from it and I am almost halfway through it already. It is none other than Avène's Ultra Fluid Invisible SPF 50. For the past couple of years, I have featured Avène sunscreens in my skincare routine. The first one I used with the newest filter, TriAsorb, was the sun cream for drier skin. I'll leave a link to that video of me using it in the description box down below. I don't have a dedicated review on that, but I do talk about it in one of my older videos. One that I did review was a favorite sunscreen from last year, and that was the Avène Intense Protect SPF 50+. Again, I'll leave a link to that review in the description box down below. Today we are going into detail about the fluid version. I have not tried the clean-ins one yet, but I'm not opposed to picking it up after this one. I already gave a spoiler alert that this sunscreen is the straw that broke the camel's back, aka I've just had enough of using the sunscreen on my face. It has officially been demoted to my chest, shoulders, body area in general, and in this review I will share with you why. But first, let's start off with the general information of the Avène Ultra Fluid Invisible SPF 50. According to Avène's UK website, this sunscreen is an invisible SPF high sun protection against UVB, UVA, and HEV blue light for the sensitive skin of the face. Claims are it has a water-like formula, a bare skin feel, perfect as a makeup base, high tolerance for sensitive skin, fragrance-free, and water-resistant. The price of the sunscreen is around 15 euros for a 50 ml bottle. As you can see, it is an opaque orange bottle with a white click-off cap, and as you may have guessed, this sunscreen was made in France. That's it for the general information. Now let's move on to the ingredients for Avène's Ultra Fluid Invisible SPF 50. Starting off with the UV filters, it is an all-organic sunscreen, meaning it is all chemical filters. What I like about the Avène sunscreens in particular for the past couple of years, ever since they came out with TriAsorb, is I've noticed that the sun filters that they use are new generation filters. I believe it was in the sun cream as well as the Avène Intense Protect. I think it's the same filters all around. I'm not 100% sure of that, but I do believe that they're fairly similar. Either way, I will list the ones in the Ultra Fluid. It has Uvinol A+, Uvinol T150, TriAsorb S, and the new filter from Avène, TriAsorb. The combination of these UV filters cover UVA1, UVA2, UVB, and blue light. The protection of Avène's Ultra Fluid is, as I've mentioned, SPF 50, not SPF 50+. That is my bad for picking this up. I always pick up an SPF of 50+. I always try to get the highest protection possible that's indicated on the packaging. And as you can see here, it has the UVA circle label. So what that means is the UVA protection is at least a third of the SPF. So in this case, it's a minimum PPD of around 16.5. Let's quickly touch upon the star UV filter in Avène's sunscreen range right now. It is TriAsorb. That is the new UV filter which protects against UVB, all UVA rays, as well as blue light. It has also been tested to be non-toxic against various species of marine biodiversity. And as someone who lives in a beach city, likes to go swimming at the beach, that is most definitely a nice to have in a sunscreen. The rest of the ingredients in this formula is what gives this sunscreen its fluid-like texture with a touch of moisture. What I really appreciate about the sunscreen actually is that it is a fluid formula without the use of denatured alcohol, and it is fragrance free. That's it for the ingredients. Now let's move on to the texture of this sunscreen. So like the name suggests, it has a fluid texture. Just gonna drop a little bit there. As you can see, it is runny, but not super fast where you need to act quickly. There is a slight yellow tint to it. It's the same as the Avène Intense Protect and the sun cream. It does not feel greasy at all, and even though there is that yellow kind of brightish tint, it does eventually blend in to the skin. This is the hand with the sunscreen, this one without. From what I could see in my camera monitor here, there is a bit of a sheen coming from the sunscreen, but definitely not something that's super overwhelming compared to the other Avène sunscreens I have tried in the past. Definitely more forgiving, especially for those of us with oily skin types. I do find that the hand with the sunscreen is a smidge more even, but I do notice, and I noticed this as well on my face, but I'll talk about that later on, is that this hand looks a tad bit lighter than my other hand. Let's move on to how I apply the Avène Ultra Fluid Invisible SPF 50. I like to apply this all in one go, all over my face and neck. The amount I need for my face and neck for the 2 milligram per centimeter square, I would say is around a Canadian quarter size amount. I will empty it into the palm of my hand. And like I said, just apply it all in one go. Sometimes I will add a little bit more if I plan on wearing a low cut top or dress and taking it down to my chest. As you will see in the cutaway, on first application, it's actually applying really nice and smoothly. I'm using a really light hand to spread the sunscreen. I don't try to really rub in sunscreen in general. I just like to glide it on, make sure there is an even film on my skin. As I keep a light hand while applying the sunscreen, I don't experience any streakiness. For the most part, it easily applies on my skin, but there is unfortunately a downfall to the sunscreen because once it starts to set and you're just trying to even out the spread of the sunscreen, making sure there's no streaking or anything like that, making sure that you're covering all your bases on your face and neck, you may or may not experience some pilling. In the case of this cutaway here, it's probably the worst I've experienced. Pilling, unfortunately, has been more common than I would like it to be with this sunscreen, but I do notice there is a pattern to it, and it really depends on how I am doing my skincare that morning. In the case of this cutaway, how I did my skincare is I had moisture on my skin. So I applied some rose water, I had a vitamin C applied, then I applied a light hydrating soothing ampule, but I did not wait long enough in between that ampule step and the sunscreen step. There was still a little bit of moisture on my face, but I thought I will just apply the sunscreen anyways because I'm too lazy to wait too long, and I typically don't like my skin feeling dry to the touch. So that's when I applied the sunscreen, and that's why the pilling happened. But on days where my skin is dry to the touch, it doesn't feel like there is some tacky moisture on my skin, that's when I notice that this sunscreen applies way better and there is minimal to no pilling. If there is any pilling, it's usually on the sides of my face near the sideburn area. Like I said though, in that cutaway I showed you, that's probably the worst I've ever had it, and that was just a typical skincare routine with maybe just a bit of moisture on top. When it comes to the finish of the Avène Ultra Fluid Invisible SPF 50, I do find this formula in particular makes my skin look slightly paler than the other sunscreens in the range. It's nothing too stark. I don't find it to be a white cast or a yellow cast, but for me it is noticeable, and it could be because this time of year my skin tends to tan really easily no matter how much I'm under the shade or protect my skin with sunscreen. So that could be the reason why I see such a contrast on my skin. Because this performs better when the skin is drier, I find this sunscreen doesn't really add any extra moisture. I know it is of a fluid texture, but there is still some basic humectants and emollients in the formula, so I thought it would offer just something, but I think for my skin it's not enough. And because of that, I felt like the quality of my skin looked a little bit depleted with moisture, even though the sunscreen did not dry out my skin. And this brings me back to the problem of like, I layered an ampoule in my skincare routine that added some hydration, and just having that moisture on my skin made this sunscreen perform so terribly. So I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. Anyways, back to the finish of this sunscreen. So skin looks a slight bit pale compared to the other sunscreens I tried, but it does eventually look better, I guess. My skin looks slightly depleted on the days I use this where it actually works. There is a little bit of a sheen on my skin, but it's the most forgiving kind I have tried when it comes to European sunscreens in general. But either way, I do like to powder my face down, especially this time of year where my skin tends to produce oils a lot faster. For the feel of this sunscreen, it is not greasy at all. Like I mentioned when I apply the sunscreen, it's actually really nice to use. And when I touch my skin, maybe immediately after application, there might be a little bit of tack as expected, but as the day progresses, my skin doesn't feel greasy at all. If anything, it feels like there's a light film of something moisturizing on my skin. Like I said, this isn't super moisturizing, but it does feel like there's something there. It's not bone dry. The Avène Ultra Fluid Invisible SPF 50 is a water resistant formula, like I mentioned in the general information. So because of that, I can comfortably apply this around my eye area without worry of it traveling to my eyes. In terms of how this sunscreen performs under makeup, it does state that this is supposed to be really good as a makeup base. So on the days when this actually worked nicely, I found that if I applied blush, highlighter, concealer, there was no pilling whatsoever once I added product onto my skin. Overall, my makeup holding up really well, but I will say, like any sunscreen, you should wait 10 to 20 minutes before applying makeup, just so the sunscreen has time to actually form an even film on the skin and set. That's it for my experience with the Avène Ultra Fluid Invisible SPF 50. Now on to my final thoughts, the pros, the cons, the in-between feels. Let's start off with the pros. I really appreciate that this sunscreen does not use denatured alcohol to give it its fluid-like consistency. It is not greasy feeling at all. It does not make my skin look oilier. For the most part, it is very cosmetically elegant. I like that this is water resistant, so that means even though it's an SPF of 50, it will hold up pretty well throughout the day, especially if you're wearing makeup and you can't necessarily reapply sunscreen all over it. The last pro of the sunscreen is the fact that it uses TriAsorb as one of its UV filters. That's kind of why I've been liking the Avène sunscreens lately, because it offers a broad spectrum protection, which includes blue light. And I find with that extra protection against blue light, the pigmentation I tend to develop in the summer, so my freckling, it's not as stark, not as dark as it used to be in the past. But I will say this year, haven't been going out a whole lot because it's just been way too hot. And I found a hat that I really like using in my day-to-day outfits. So because of that, I'm not actually getting as much sun exposure on my face as I did in the past. But nonetheless, that is a plus about the Avène sunscreens in general, is the TriAsorb in it. And of course, TriAsorb has been tested to be non-toxic against various species of marine biodiversity. Again, I live in a beach city. I like swimming in the sea. So that is a bonus for me when using a sunscreen in general for going to the beach. That's it for the pros. Now moving on to the cons. And the first con is a very personal one to me. And it's the fact that this is not an SPF of 50 plus. Like I said at the beginning, I did not catch that when picking up this sunscreen, or else I don't think I would have picked it up. But either way, here I am trying it, reviewing it for you all, just so you get an idea of whether or not this will work for you. Dermatologists in general recommend an SPF of 30 or greater. So this is an SPF of 50. It's definitely higher than that, and it will be good, especially if it's a sunscreen you like, and the best sunscreen is the one that you're going to use every day. But for me, in my skincare routine, I like an SPF of 50 plus. I use actives in my skincare routine on occasion that may make my skin more photosensitive to the sun. The place I live in, there's a lot of sun, way more than in Toronto, Canada. So even in wintertime, sometimes I get my freckles popping out. I just want something with as strong of a protection as possible. So that's why for me personally, this not being an SPF 50 plus is a con. The second con of the Avène Ultra Fluid Invisible SPF 50 is, you have guessed it, the pilling. It is atrocious. Why does it pill so badly? Just because I want a bit of extra moisture on my skin. A sunscreen should not be performing like that, especially in my skincare routine, especially when there's so many other skincare routines on the market that don't do that at all. This brings me to the third con, which is the fact that on the days when this sunscreen actually worked for me, there was still a smidge of pilling on the sides of my face. And I just felt like my skin looked depleted of moisture. It's not to say that this sunscreen dried out my skin, but it didn't add any more to it. And this sunscreen only worked when my skin felt dry and I wasn't using a lot of layers of skincare. So the pilling, the fact that it made my skin look depleted of moisturizer are big cons for me. The fact that this doesn't really add moisture to my skin, in fact, it just makes my skin look depleted of moisturizer, plus the fact that on application, sometimes my skin looked a slight bit paler. It kind of made me look sickly at times. I actually wore this sunscreen in my last sunscreen review video, which was on the La Roche-Posay UV Moon 400 Hydrating Cream. I mean, in the camera, sure, it looked fine, but when I was looking at myself in person, I felt like I looked dehydrated, even though my skin didn't feel that way. The last con I have for this sunscreen is that sometimes it stung my face. And I did mention that it doesn't matter what sunscreen it is, how gentle it claims to be. If my skin barrier is remotely impaired, then I will feel the sting. But I thought I would mention it as a con that even though this says it's for sensitive skin, you may not be able to rely on it even on the most sensitive skin days like barrier impairment. Overall, I find for me that the Avène Ultra Fluid Invisible SPF 50 is a bit of a letdown. I found that the more I used it, the more I was disliking it. It's not as easy and effortless to use as it seems, especially because of the pilling. So because of that, I will be demoting this to body use, especially on my chest area when I'm wearing a dress like this or tops that are low cut in general. For my chest area, I'm sure many of you feel something similar. You want something a little bit lighter in this area, nothing too heavy. And I'm also someone that is prone to congestion on my body in general. So I think that's where the sunscreen will fit into my sun care routine from this point on. If you haven't guessed already, I will most definitely not be repurchasing this once I'm finished with this bottle. It just, why would I? I don't like it. But if you did like it, let me know in the comments down below and let anyone else watching this video know if you liked it, because this is just my experience with this sunscreen, but one of you may really love this sunscreen and it works way different for you than it does for me. So if it does, in that case, let us all know. That is it for this review. As always, I hope you find content like this helpful and informative. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like. Subscribe to my channel down below for future videos. Leave a comment if you have any recommendations for other sunscreens that are of a fluid-like texture, that are SPF 50 plus, that you think work really effortlessly, no pilling whatsoever, no matter what your skincare routine is like. I would love to know about it. I got some good recommendations in my last sunscreen review video. I would love to read more. That's it for this video. See you all soon. Ciao.